The snow began falling just after the sun disappeared behind the high-rise skyline. Soft at first, almost polite, then heavier, steadier, as if the sky had decided to hush the world with a thick white blanket. By the time Kathy Bennett stepped into the city park, the ground was already a canvas of untouched white. Children had begun leaving tiny boot prints, like chaotic signatures across the frozen grass. She didn't step in them. She walked along the clean edges, always along the edge. The park was alive tonight. Christmas Eve brought out everything Kathy had learned to avoid: joy, noise, unpredictability. Brass bands played carols near the main entrance, and the smell of cinnamon-roasted almonds drifted on the wind. Couples held hands beneath light-draped trees. Strangers shared benches, mugs of cocoa, and the warmth of being human. And yet, Kathy moved through it all like a sculpture. Wrapped in a flawless cream cashmere coat, her golden hair perfectly curled beneath a designer hat, she looked like she'd stepped out of a luxury ad, untouchable, polished, pristine. But behind the high cheekbones and poised posture was a silence that thundered louder than the music around her. She paused near a bench dusted in snow, her breath visible in the air, and stared ahead without focus. If anyone recognized her, the CEO who once graced the cover of Time with the headline, "The Woman Who Never Breaks," they didn't approach. They rarely did. And Kathy liked it that way. Or at least that's what she told herself. Once, years ago, Christmas meant cookies shaped like reindeer, a fireplace crackling, and the kind of laughter that echoes long after the sound fades. But that was before the miscarriage. Before the man who swore he loved her walked away. Before she threw herself into quarterly earnings and Forbes interviews like they were lifeboats on a sinking ship. Now the only thing that glowed on Christmas was the phone screen lighting up with cold corporate greetings. "Thank you for another successful year, Miss Bennett. Looking forward to Q1 targets. Enjoy your holidays. No, we miss you. No, wish you were here." Just sterile lines from people who feared her or needed her. Kathy sat down, brushing snow off the bench with a gloved hand. She stared at the carousel in the distance. Children twirled in joyful chaos. A little girl fell, cried, and was scooped up by her father without hesitation. Kathy's gaze dropped. She clenched her jaw. Not jealousy. No, this wasn't envy. It was grief, unprocessed and cold like the wind stinging her cheeks. How could someone have so much power and feel so hollow? That was the paradox of Kathy Bennett. She owned 5 homes, but no one to call when she couldn't sleep. She led thousands of employees, but never heard "I love you" when the world went quiet. She had money, influence, respect, but not warmth. And then, a voice. So small, so fragile, so close. "I don't have a mama. Can I hold your hand, ma'am?" Kathy blinked, turning her head slowly, almost uncertain if she'd imagined it. Standing beside her was a little girl, tiny, no more than 3. A red, puffy jacket, far too thin for this kind of cold, and a well-loved teddy bear tucked in one mittened hand. Her brown eyes were wide and glassy, snowflakes sitting unbothered on her lashes, like she was too still to blink. And just like that, Kathy's world tilted. Not because of who the child was, but because of how she asked. This wasn't a cry for help. This wasn't begging. This was pure longing, unfiltered, unmanipulated, real. A need so basic and human, it cracked the marble around Kathy's heart. For a moment, she just stared. She didn't speak. Her polished voice, the one that closed deals and silenced rooms, was missing, because in front of her stood everything she had never allowed herself to want again. A child, a connection, a question that didn't ask for her title, just her hand. And for the first time in years, Kathy Bennett forgot what she was supposed to say. She just felt. Kathy Bennett had stared into the eyes of billionaire rivals and held her own. She had outnegotiated world leaders, stared down the barrel of mergers, and walked out of lawsuits without a blink. But now, she was frozen, not from the cold, not from fear, but because this child, this little girl no taller than her knee, had asked something no one else in Kathy's entire life had ever dared to ask. "I don't have a mama. Can I hold your hand, ma'am? Just for one day." The words weren't loud. They weren't dramatic, but they landed like a stone thrown into still water, rippling through layers of a heart that had long been sealed. Kathy blinked slowly. She looked down. The little girl was bundled in a red puffy coat, the stitching along the sleeve coming loose. Her boots were 2 sizes too big. Her cheeks were pink from the cold, but her eyes, those eyes held a question deeper than words. Not just, "Can I hold your hand?" but, "Will you see me? Will you care, just for a moment?" Kathy opened her mouth, but no words came. She wasn't used to moments like this. Uncontrolled, unrehearsed, purely human. For a woman who made decisions worth millions in seconds, this one took her breath away. Her gaze lifted, scanning the area. And that's when she saw him. A man, standing not too far behind the girl. He didn't move. He didn't wave. He just watched, silently, calmly. His coat was old, boots worn, beard patchy from the cold. But his eyes weren't afraid. They weren't desperate. They were steady, soft, watchful. He gave a slight nod, not asking, not begging, just giving her space to choose. And that, more than anything, made Kathy's chest ache. She looked back down at the child. This wasn't a setup. This wasn't a trap. This was just a little girl asking for a piece of warmth in a world that had given her none. Her gloved fingers twitched. Then slowly, deliberately, Kathy reached out her hand. "Just for one day," she asked gently, her voice no longer corporate, no longer guarded, just hers. The little girl nodded. "Because it's Christmas," Kathy whispered. "Maybe we both deserve a little joy today." And into her palm slipped the smallest, coldest, and most honest hand Kathy had ever held. Kathy's hand hovered in the space between them, gloved and motionless, as if time itself held its breath. She hadn't meant to extend it. It had moved on its own. Instinct. Or maybe longing she didn't recognize until it was too late to hide. The little girl Lena looked at it for just a second, and then, with childlike trust that shattered something silent inside Kathy, she reached up. Their hands touched, small and cold, against warm and trembling. And in that single moment, something that had been buried deep beneath Kathy's polished exterior, beneath the press releases, the designer shoes, the conference room speeches, shifted. She felt it, like a crack forming in stone. It wasn't loud, it wasn't dramatic, but it was there. Her breath caught. Her chest tightened in a way she hadn't known in years. Not from panic, not from pressure, but from presence. This little girl, this stranger, had just anchored her back to earth. Not with noise, not with need, but with the quiet simplicity of a child who wanted nothing more than to be held. Kathy looked down again, and for the first time really saw her. The worn teddy bear, the patches on the coat, the eyes that held too much for someone so small. And the truth hit her harder than she expected. This little girl wasn't just asking to hold a hand. She was offering to hold a heart. And without meaning to, without planning or signing or calculating, Kathy Bennett said yes. Not with words, not with smiles, but with the quiet act of not letting go. They stood there for a beat, hand in hand, snow swirling around them like tiny, silent witnesses. In that exact moment, the story began. He hadn't said a word. Not when the little girl approached, not when Kathy reached out, not even when their hands met in the cold silence of the snow. But his presence was louder than words. Kathy looked up again, this time fully meeting his eyes. He stood still a few steps back, hands tucked into the pockets of a worn brown coat. The stitching along the seams was frayed. His boots were scuffed and dusted with snow. A flannel collar peeked out a little too thin for the winter chill. But none of that mattered, because his eyes said everything. They weren't pleading, they weren't cautious, they weren't ashamed. They were steady, calm, protective. The kind of eyes that knew what it meant to wait for buses that never came, for answers that never arrived, for people who never looked back. The kind of eyes that had learned to survive and still stayed soft. "She's not usually this bold," he said finally, voice low and a little rough from the cold. Kathy blinked. She hadn't expected him to speak. But now that he had, his voice carried something familiar. Not the pitch, not the accent, but the truth. The weight of someone who'd been through enough to skip small talk. But I think today, she just needed to ask. He crouched beside the girl, gently brushing the snow from her coat hood. There was a tenderness in the motion that caught Kathy off guard. It wasn't performative. It wasn't for her benefit. It was real. This man, whoever he was not weak. He wasn't helpless. He wasn't begging. He was just tired, but still standing. Kathy didn't know his name. She didn't know his story. But she knew this much. This man was not invisible to his daughter, and that made him impossible to ignore. They walked without a destination, just three strangers tied together by the most unlikely thread, a child's simple request. Kathy kept glancing down at the tiny hand in hers. It didn't grip tightly, it didn't demand, it just rested there, like it had found a place it finally belonged. The snow crunched beneath their feet, laughter danced on the wind. And every so often, Lena looked up at her with a smile so bright it cracked something deeper inside Kathy's chest each time. They passed a small wooden cart near the park's edge. A man with a thick scarf and cherry-red cheeks called out, "Ice cream! Even in the snow, kids still want sprinkles." Lena stopped wide-eyed. "May I, ma'am?" Kathy smiled before she could think about it. "Of course." She handed over a crisp bill and turned to Lena. "What flavor do you like, sweetheart?" "Vanilla," Lena said softly. "With rainbow sprinkles, please." As they sat on a bench nearby, Lena joyfully licking her cone, Kathy couldn't help but ask, "So what does your papa do?" Lena's face lit up like a Christmas tree. "Papa makes toys out of wood," she beamed. "He made me a rocking horse and a dragon." Kathy laughed. "A dragon that breathes fire?" Lena giggled. "No, but it guards my bed from nightmares." Kathy raised a playful eyebrow. "Does it work?" Lena nodded, serious now. "Yep, nightmares don't even try anymore." Kathy grinned genuinely. Then Lena added with a wrinkle of her nose, "But Papa's not good at princess stuff." "No? Nope. He doesn't know how to do princess hair, or which dresses are sparkly enough." Kathy burst into laughter, and it wasn't a polite CEO chuckle. It was real, joyful, unfiltered, the kind of laugh that felt like home. "Well," she said, wiping her eyes, "maybe I could help someday." "I've read a lot of fairy tales." Lena's eyes sparkled. "Even the sad ones." Kathy nodded. "Especially the sad ones," she said, her voice softer, "because those are the ones that need better endings." They sat there, side by side, eating ice cream in the cold. And even though her boots were wet, her coat was expensive, and her schedule was a battlefield of meetings, Kathy didn't want to leave. She didn't know what this was. She didn't have a word for it. But in this moment, this little girl, this snow, this melting ice cream cone, she felt warm. They walked slowly now, not because of the snow, but because neither of them wanted the moment to pass too quickly. Lena skipped beside Kathy, still clutching the half-eaten ice cream cone like it was the most precious treasure in the world. Her free hand stayed nestled in Kathy's gloved palm. The cold didn't seem to matter anymore. Kathy hadn't felt this kind of silence in years. The good kind. The kind where words aren't needed, where presence is enough. They passed under a canopy of golden lights strung across pine trees, their reflections dancing on the snow like tiny fireflies. Then, out of nowhere, Lena's voice piped up, soft, honest, full of something that could break the strongest steel. "You're warm," she whispered, "like I always imagined a mama would be." Kathy froze. It wasn't dramatic. She didn't fall to her knees or burst into tears. But something inside her cracked. And not a surface crack, not like a scratch in polished marble. This was deeper. This was soul deep. She looked down at the little girl, so small, so full of truth it hurt. And for a second, Kathy couldn't breathe. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice barely audible, "for letting me be your mama today." Lena didn't say anything. She didn't need to. She just leaned against Kathy's side, resting her cheek lightly on her arm as they kept walking. And in that quiet, snowy moment, Kathy Bennett, CEO, boardroom, warrior woman of steel, realized something she never admitted even to herself. She had spent her whole life being seen, but never truly felt. Until now. It happened later that evening. Lena had fallen asleep in Kathy's lap, one tiny hand still wrapped around the teddy bear, the other curled near her cheek. Her breathing was soft, steady, safe. Charles stood near the kitchen window, staring out into the dark. His hands were tucked into his sleeves, but his posture, shoulders lowered back, slightly bowed, spoke of quiet exhaustion. Kathy poured 2 mugs of tea and walked over, handing one to him. "She adores you," she said. He took the cup, slowly nodding once. "She's everything," he replied. There was a silence. Not awkward, just heavy, full of something unspoken. Then Kathy asked the question that had been quietly sitting in the back of her mind since the moment they met. "Charles, is Lena your daughter?" He didn't flinch. He didn't look shocked. He just let out a breath he had been holding for too long. Then he turned toward her, his voice steady but raw. "No, not by blood." Kathy blinked. "But you've raised her like she's your own." He looked back out the window, and this time his voice dropped lower. "One winter night, someone left a basket on my doorstep. There was a baby inside, wrapped in a pink blanket. No name, no note. Just a line scribbled on a piece of paper." He paused, his throat tight. "Please don't hate her. That's all it said." Kathy stood in stunned silence. Charles continued, "I didn't know what I was doing. I wasn't ready. I had nothing. Just odd jobs, an apartment that barely stayed warm, and hands that had only ever held tools. But I couldn't walk away." He glanced at Kathy now, eyes quiet but burning. I wasn't her best option, just the only one who didn't walk away. Those words hit her like thunder. She felt her breath catch. Because Kathy, who had once been left in a hospital room, bleeding and alone, understood better than anyone what it meant when someone chooses to stay. And for the first time, she saw Charles not just as Lena's guardian, but as the kind of man the world rarely notices, yet children never forget. Charles had just finished speaking. The air between them was thick, not with awkwardness, but with something deeper. A kind of quiet that only comes when 2 people realize they both know what loss feels like. Kathy stared into her tea. The steam curled upward like smoke from something long buried. She didn't speak right away, but then softly, as if tugging words from the deepest part of her, "When I was 27, she began, "I thought I was going to be a mother." Charles didn't interrupt. He didn't nod. He just stayed still, present. Kathy's voice was low, controlled, but not cold. Like someone walking barefoot over broken glass, careful not to bleed again. "I was in love. Or I thought I was." He said all the right things, talked about a future, about names, colors for the nursery. We even heard the heartbeat. She gave a small, dry laugh, empty of joy. 12 weeks. We cried, both of us. But at week 16, she paused, swallowed. I started bleeding. Charles lowered his gaze. His hands tightened around the tea mug. Kathy didn't look up. Her eyes stayed fixed on nothing. Emergency room, cold hands, bright lights, and then a doctor with the softest voice told me it was unlikely. Another breath, quieter now. Almost impossible, he said, to carry again. The words hung in the room like frost, and then another cut, sharper than all the rest. He left, that night, packed a bag, said I should focus on healing. What he meant was he didn't want the burden of loving someone who couldn't give him a child. Charles didn't move. Didn't offer sympathy. Didn't say, I'm sorry. He just stayed. And that was everything. Kathy blinked once, then again. I never cried, she whispered. Not once. She finally looked up, eyes shimmering but not breaking. Because Kathy Bennett doesn't cry. Not in boardrooms, not in hospitals, not even in the dark. Her voice cracked then, barely, like the sound of glass under pressure. But lately, she said, softer than breath, I think I've been broken a long time. I just got really good at hiding the cracks. Neither of them spoke. The kitchen light above hummed softly. The snow outside pressed against the window like a memory trying to get in. Lena was still asleep upstairs, unaware that downstairs something invisible and irreversible was unfolding. Kathy stood near the counter, her hands still loosely wrapped around her teacup, now lukewarm and forgotten. Charles remained seated at the table, elbows on his knees, fingers interlaced, gaze steady, not at her, not at the floor, just into space. No apologies, no comforting words, no attempt to fix what couldn't be fixed, just silence. But not empty. It was full of shared grief, quiet survival, and the heavy ache of people who'd been left but chose to stay strong anyway. Kathy's eyes found his. He didn't flinch. He didn't try to read her. He just held the moment. And that was enough. That was more than anyone had ever given her. For the first time, she felt it wasn't pity in his silence. It wasn't curiosity. It wasn't weakness. It was recognition. He had carried pain too. He had stitched it into every act of kindness, and now so had she. They stood on either side of the same wound, and without speaking, they saw each other in it. Not as saviors, not as broken projects, but as people who knew what it was like to be cracked and still keep standing. A kind of bond began to take root, slow, wordless, honest. And though neither of them would dare name it yet, both felt it growing in the quiet between their breaths. A softness, a safety, a truth that required nothing but presence. It started slowly, a chalkboard in the sunroom. Letters written big and clumsy, backwards sometimes, always with fierce determination. C-A-T, that's cat, Kathy would say, smiling. But it needs a tail, right? Lena would giggle then, add a tail to the T, like it was the most important thing in the world. Kathy had never known how joyful it could feel to teach, not command, to guide, not direct, to be chosen by a child who owed her nothing. And at night, there were stories. Fairy tales that started with once upon a time, but somehow always ended with Lena tucked under one arm and a sleepy voice whispering, "Tell me just one more, Mama Kathy." The first time Lena said it, Kathy thought she misheard. Mama Kathy, not Miss Bennett, not ma'am, not lady with the ice cream, just Mama, and her name. She didn't correct her. She couldn't. Something in her chest fractured and filled all at once, because she knew Lena didn't say it out of confusion. She said it out of comfort, out of instinct, out of love. Later that week, Charles passed by the sunroom and paused at the doorway. Lena was curled up on Kathy's lap, tracing letters on a worksheet with a purple crayon. Kathy brushed the little girl's curls out of her eyes and whispered, "That's beautiful, sweetheart." And Lena, without looking up, whispered back, "I love you, Mama Kathy." Charles didn't enter. He didn't make a sound, but something shifted in his eyes. Something quiet and scared. He had been everything to that child, and now, for the first time, he felt replaceable. It happened on a Tuesday. The snow was gentle outside. The living room was warm. Kathy was braiding Lena's hair while they listened to soft Christmas music. Everything was perfect until Lena tilted her head and asked, "Mama Kathy, if I have you, do I still need Daddy?" The room froze. So did Kathy's hands. She laughed softly at first, trying to brush it off. "Sweetheart, of course, you need—" But her voice cracked. She stopped. There was something dangerous about that question. Not because it was wrong, but because it was so innocently true and so terrifying. Because deep down, she'd wondered it herself. She had held Lena like a daughter, loved her like a daughter. She had felt needed for the first time in years. But she wasn't Lena's mother. She was someone who had walked in on a snowy night and accidentally found a warmth she never planned for. And now she feared she had taken too much. That night, she packed her things. No goodbyes, no notes, just silence, a quiet retreat. Charles found the empty guest room the next morning. No trace of perfume, no folded sweater, just a child sleeping in a bed that smelled faintly of a woman who had once made the world feel safe. And a father standing in the hallway wondering what he did wrong when all he ever did was stay. Kathy disappeared like a snowflake landing on asphalt. Here one moment, melted the next. No note, no call, no goodbye, just gone. Lena asked every day, "Did Mama Kathy forget us, Daddy?" "No, sweetheart," Charles said, gently tying her shoelaces. "Maybe she'll come tomorrow." But he knew she wasn't coming. And each day that passed, the light in Lena's eyes dimmed just a little more. She stopped asking to read stories at night. She drew fewer dragons and princesses. She laughed less. And Charles? He was doing what fathers do, being strong. But it was killing him quietly every single day. Because it wasn't just Lena who missed her. He missed her too. The quiet cup of tea, the shared glance when Lena said something funny, the calm in the storm. And the cruelest part? He understood. He understood why she left, why she felt like she was stealing something. But she was wrong. She hadn't stolen anything. She had given them everything. And now her silence was the loudest sound in the house. It started with a cough, just a dry little thing. Then chills, fever, tears. By midnight, Lena was burning hot and trembling like a leaf. Her tiny fingers clutched the blanket. Her lips murmured nonsense. Charles didn't sleep. He sat by her bed all night, pressing cool towels to her forehead, whispering, "It's okay, baby. Daddy's here. You're gonna be okay." But it wasn't okay. Not this time. By morning, she couldn't open her eyes. Her breathing shallow, panicked. Her skin clammy and pale. And Charles, the man who never cried, the man who had stayed calm when they left her on his doorstep years ago, now shook with fear. He called the clinic. They said, emergency room. He bundled her in blankets, carried her in his arms, and realized something terrifying. I don't know how to do this alone anymore. In the hospital hallway, the world spun. Doctors in masks, machines beeping, people rushing. And in the middle of it all, a father holding on to hope like it was the last breath he had. Then, he did something he never imagined he would. He reached for his phone and called the one person he thought he shouldn't, Kathy. The phone rang once. Just once. And then she answered. No questions. No hesitation, no why now, only 3 words. Where is she? It took Kathy 17 minutes to reach the hospital. She didn't even change out of her slippers, didn't put on makeup, didn't bring a coat. All she had was breathless panic and a heart that had just remembered how to break. When she burst into the ER, Charles stood up, but the words caught in his throat. She didn't need directions. She walked straight to Lena's room. And when she saw the child pale, hooked up to wires, trembling under fluorescent light, Kathy broke. Tears came before words. But then she reached out, trembling, and whispered, "Mama's here, sweetheart. I'm here now, and I'm not leaving you. Not again." That night, in the silence of the ICU, Kathy held Lena's hand, one small hand inside another, like a promise being remade. It was past midnight. Machines beeped gently in the background. The storm outside had quieted, but inside, the storm was just beginning to calm. Charles sat on one side of Lena's hospital bed, Kathy on the other. Both were silent, both afraid to speak, because sometimes words are heavier than silence. Finally, Charles whispered, "She called you Mama." Kathy nodded slowly, eyes red, voice almost broken. "She asked me if she still needed you. That's when I left." Charles looked down, fists clenched. "And I thought you were going to take her from me." A long silence. "You didn't," he added quietly. "But the fear stayed. I just couldn't lose her." Kathy reached out. No speeches, no apologies, just truth. "I was scared too. Scared I'd ruin what you two had. Scared that loving her meant hurting you." Charles looked at her, really looked. And what he saw wasn't a powerful CEO, but a woman who had lost a child and found a reason to breathe again in the laughter of someone else's. Then, for the first time, his voice didn't shake. Maybe she doesn't need to choose. Maybe she needs both of us. In that quiet hospital room, something shifted. They weren't rivals. They weren't broken strangers. They were two people bound not by past wounds, but by the fragile, beautiful love of a little girl in a red coat. She walked out of the glass tower, not with a press release, not with champagne, not with applause. Just peace. No cameras, no board votes, no suits chasing after her. Just her own 2 feet, carrying her to somewhere finally worth going. The house wasn't big. It creaked when it rained. The paint on the mailbox was chipped. But inside, there was warmth. There was the smell of cinnamon waffles in the morning, Charles humming while fixing Lena's broken toy dragon, and Lena's giggles echoing through the little hallway like wind chimes. Kathy didn't miss the corner office. Not the meetings, not the power. She missed none of it. Because now she had a little hand tugging on her shirt saying, "Mama Kathy, look, I drew you with sparkles." And every evening as the fire crackled in their wood stove, she realized something. She was finally living a life she didn't want to escape from. There was no grand dinner, no violinist in the background, no crowd holding up phones for a proposal video. It happened on a Tuesday. The sky was soft and gray. Lena had just fallen asleep on the couch, her drawing book still open. Charles stood in the kitchen, hands slightly shaking, holding a small wooden box. No velvet, no gold trim, just a tiny thing he had carved himself from the same kind of wood he once used to make Lena's toy dragon. Kathy looked up confused at first, then Charles opened it. Inside was a ring. Not a diamond, not even metal, just a ring of polished wood, warm to the touch, worn smooth by care. He didn't get down on one knee. He didn't have to. "You're not what I used to pray for," he said quietly. "You're what I never knew I needed." Kathy didn't cry, not this time. She just stepped forward and held his face. That was her yes, and that was enough. Through the foggy kitchen window, a little face pressed against the glass. Lena's eyes were wide, her breath misting up the pane, tiny hands slapping the glass in excitement. She had seen it, all of it. "Mama said yes!" she screamed, turning around like a whirlwind in her pajamas. The cat jumped off the couch. A spoon clattered to the floor. But none of it mattered. Lena was glowing. She rushed over and threw herself between them, laughing, arms wide, as if she'd just pulled the universe together herself. "Now we're a family," she whispered, as if it were magic. Not by blood, not by law, by choice. And that's what made it real. Outside, snow had started to fall. But inside, there was only warmth and the quiet, sacred knowledge that sometimes the most beautiful families are the ones we build with broken pieces. The snow was falling again, just like that night. The same park, the same frozen fountain, but everything else had changed. Lena walked between them, one hand in Charles's, the other in Kathy's. She was taller now. Her coat was still red, but this one was new, a gift from Mama Kathy last Christmas. Children's laughter echoed. Lights blinked on the trees, but Lena only looked up at the two people beside her. "This is where I met you," she said softly. Charles squeezed her hand. Kathy smiled down, her eyes full of warmth. And none of them said more because nothing more was needed. Some moments don't need to be explained. They just need to be felt. For the first time in years, Kathy didn't feel like an outsider here. Not the rich woman alone on the bench. Now she was home. The air was crisp. A small crowd had gathered in the park. Families, volunteers, strangers, drawn by the sign "One More Day," launch celebration. Charles said a few quiet words. Kathy spoke about kindness, about second chances. But it was Lena who silenced the whole park. She stepped onto the wooden crate they used as a stage. In her little red coat, cheeks flushed pink with winter wind, Lena looked out and said simply, "I used to not have a mom." A murmur spread. She looked at Kathy, then smiled, not the smile of a child seeking approval, but the smile of someone sure of where she belonged. "But now, I have Mama Kathy forever." There was a stillness. Then someone clapped. Then more. And then the whole crowd rose to their feet as if something sacred had just been declared. It wasn't a speech. It wasn't a campaign. It was just truth, spoken from the smallest mouth, but echoing in every heart present. Snowflakes drifted slowly from the sky, melting as they touched three warm bodies huddled together beneath the golden glow of Christmas lights. No big speeches, no flashbulbs, just a quiet, perfect moment. Kathy knelt down and opened her arms. Charles stepped closer. Lena didn't say anything, she just dove in, and the three of them held each other like they were afraid to ever let go again. "Forever and ever," Lena whispered, and neither Kathy nor Charles corrected her. Because she was right. This wasn't a family built by blood. It was built by choice. By heartbreak, by healing, by a red coat, a wooden dragon, a missed phone call, and one that was answered, and by a hand that reached back when another hand reached out. Some families are born, some are made, but the rarest ones are chosen. Family isn't always who you're born to, it's who never walks away. Kathy thought losing her baby was the end of her story as a mother. Charles believed love alone couldn't be enough to raise a child. And Lena, the little girl no one wanted, showed them both the truth. Love doesn't need commission. It doesn't ask for bloodlines. It just stays. We don't get to choose where we're born, but we can choose where we belong. Sometimes all it takes is one hand reaching back when another dares to reach out. That's how families are made, not by blood, but by bravery. If this story moved you, made you tear up, or made you believe in second chances again, hit subscribe to Whispers of Life. Here we tell stories that remind you there's still kindness in the world, still hope, still love that stays. Because somewhere out there, we all need a Mama Kathy. Or maybe, just maybe, we're meant to become one. Leave us a comment, share your story, and don't forget to turn on the bell so you never miss a moment that might just change your life.